Hey everybody, this is Kelsey Down from the Arcane Library. I'm the creator of Shadowdark RPG, and I wanted to walk you through how to create a monster for Shadowdark RPG, so that's what we're going to cover today. So we're going to be using some of the tables from the Shadowdark RPG core rules. Whoa! And I'm going to show you guys how I would make use of these to generate a unique monster that might have some features or some qualities that make it a little bit unpredictable and something that I might not have thought of otherwise on my own. Alright, so in order to do this, we're going to jump on over to another screen I have here, and we have the Shadowdark RPG book pulled open here, and then next to it we have a blank template in order for us to fill out a monster, and then down below me I have a die roller because we might end up using that to generate some ideas. So, just a quick overview of all of the stuff that monsters have. They have a lot of the same things that characters have in Shadowdark. They're going to have an armor class and hit points. One thing is that monsters always use a d8 for their hit points, and I usually take the average, which is 4.5 times their level, and then you add their constitution modifier one time, just like with characters. So monsters also have several attacks usually, even lower level monsters, and this is because in Shadowdark it's often the case that it is numerous characters against one or a few monsters. And so in order to kind of counterbalance that difference in number of attacks coming from the character side, we have to give the monsters a little bit more to work with so that they, on their turn, can have a little bit more impact. And this is generally something that's referred to as action economy. You have a certain amount of action that goes to the characters and a certain amount that goes to the monsters. And if they're really, really out of sync with each other, you're going to have a power imbalance between the two. Next, each monster has a movement quantity or speed. So most monsters can move near, some can fly, some can dig. In Shadowdark, there's no specific type of movement defined. So you usually would want to use the word to explain how it works, like a monster can hover, or it can fly, or it can burrow, or it can swim. So common sense definitely does prevail here, and nothing precludes you from coming up with an interesting new way of movement, like teleport or blinks. Now, one tip here. When you are giving a larger monster a movement, typically that monster is going to move double near, which is essentially 2 movement blocks. I would caution you against ever giving a monster the far movement, because far in Shadowdark is as far as someone can see, and so then it's almost as if you're giving that monster teleportation. So even really, really big monsters like the Tarrasque have movements that are defined in chunks of near, because that allows you to have some interest to the battle area that something is taking place in, and doesn't necessarily mean that a monster can straight up teleport over to you. So just be aware of that when you're designing the movement speed for your monster. Alright, another thing is all monsters have stat modifiers, just like characters, but we don't put the full number in here, we just put the bonus or penalty that a monster has. And when we're determining what this is, I like to compare my monster against other common monsters where me as a person understands the numbers involved. So a classic example is an elephant. I use an elephant as a sort of measuring stick monster because in the real world I can kind of estimate roughly how strong an elephant is, and then I can start to imagine how does my monster stack up against an elephant in strength. I would strongly recommend looking at mundane creatures that you feel familiar with in the real world to stack up against your monster and give you kind of a good context to place your monster's stat modifiers into. So one final thing to note about stat modifiers is that monsters can actually have higher stat modifiers than player characters. So just know that you can break those rules when you're making a monster. Next, monsters have a typical alignment. It's, hard to say that any monster could always line up with the alignment listed here. I think that would be incorrect. So I usually give a generic one. And things like neutral are typically what I would give to monsters that are like wild animals. And then deciding law or chaos really depends on what you feel about your monster, if it's a more intelligent creature. Spellcasting, some monsters do have it. Here's a really important thing to note before we possibly start developing a spellcaster. Monsters' spells usually are much more limited in quantity than what a character could have, and they are almost never the same spells that a character could have. There's a lot of reasons for this, but the first one is that we want unpredictability. Monsters are so much more interesting when the characters don't know what's coming at them. And if they have a spell that's right out of the book, the characters are already going to say, hey, I know how Fireball works. Hey, I know how Charm Person works, something like that. So we want to avoid making things predictable in that way. The other thing is that monsters are special. They don't have to follow the rules that characters follow. They can have spells that are more powerful than what the characters could access, and they often do. They can cast more than one spell per turn sometimes, and that goes back to what we talked about with action economy in the attacks. When a monster is only going once and characters are going a lot, you need to have some countervailing forces to make sure that that monster can still hold its own. One important thing to mention is that monsters do follow some of the rules as far as spellcasting failure goes. They actually treat this the same way as player characters. So if a monster is casting a spell using either intelligence or charisma and it rolls a natural 1, it actually has to roll a wizard mishap. And if it rolls a natural 1 with a wisdom-based spell, it's going to treat that the same way that a priest has to treat penance. The final thing on this list here is darkness adaptation. Monsters are by default dark adapted. Characters are never dark adapted. They cannot see in the dark. And this is totally unfair, and that's how it's supposed to be. Now, there are some corner cases where a monster, especially a humanoid one, might not be dark adapted. You might decide to call that out or to make it known that maybe a human cultist or something that is very humanoid or person adjacent is not actually dark adapted. But in 99% of cases, monsters can see in the dark. Don't feel bad about it. It's the way the game is designed. I'm going to start us off with maybe a level 4 through 6 monster, which you can see under the level information here is a risky and kind of uncommon monster, one that's going to have normal treasure, and it's a challenge to experienced crawlers. It's not going to be a cakewalk. It's not going to be the hardest thing that they've fought either. Okay, and the next thing that we need to decide is what's going to be the combat role of this monster. On the left-hand side, you'll see there's a column that talks about this, and there are a variety of different types of monsters, plus some guidance for how you kind of want to frame the monster. Because here's an insider secret. In Shadowdark, the math is not extremely strict. You don't have to follow strident rules about what the armor class is going to be. You can set it at a number and say it's just that. And you don't have to necessarily make them follow a super rigid path towards what their attack bonuses are going to be. We'll base those off of their stats, but we might raise or lower them a little bit depending on the monster's role and what its overall level is. I think that maybe making a soldier sort of monster is a good baseline. A soldier is a really common, average at everything kind of monster, and this might be a good way for us to illustrate how to make a typical monster. So we know we're doing a level 4 through 6 monster. Let's just say level 5, the average, just to make that simple. And we're making a soldier style monster who has pretty average stuff across the board. Average attacks, average AC, average damage output. All right. We have some crucial information and now jumped us back to page 190 of the core rules for this page called Monster Generator. I typically use this page when I have to make a monster up totally on the fly with no planning, because this will automatically select certain numbers for you just to make things easy. Like it'll automatically tell you what its armor class is, automatically tell you what level it is and the kinds of damage it can deal. So we're not going to use those bits because we're going a bit more crafted here. We know some of that. What we're going to do is use these 3 columns called quality, strength, and weakness to give us some fun ideas for our monster. So here we go. The first thing I'm going to roll on is what is the quality of our monster. D20 roll, we got a 4. So we have a demonic monster. I like demons. I like demonic monsters, so this is going to be fun. All right, next thing, what is going to be the strength of this monster? 12 means it's going to be stealthy. Oh, a stealthy demon. I wouldn't have predicted that, so this is already exciting. All right, and then the last thing is let's roll for a weakness. 5. Its weakness is vanity. That seems to fit well with a demon. Okay, so it looks like we're going to be making a demon-type monster of the soldier variety, a run-of-the-mill demon, if one could say there was such a thing. And it's going to be stealthy and prone to vanity. Final bit of planning here before we really jump into making the monster. I want to make it weird. This is one of my favorite tables from the Shadowdark core rules as far as monster design goes, and this is giving the monster a mutation. And this makes it really unpredictable, which in my opinion is the best way to go. So we're gonna roll, let's do 1 mutation to start, and if we're feeling it, we'll roll some more. 7, we got Boneless as our mutation 1. That's kind of cool. I actually really like that because maybe this is why it's stealthy. Maybe it can slither underneath door frames and stuff and it doesn't make a lot of noise since it's kind of jelly-like. Okay, so I took some notes over here on our monster sheet that we're filling in on the far side over there. We've got a level 5 demon-type monster, soldier role, stealthy, prone to vanity, and boneless. So let's jump in on how we would design this. First of all, I'm going to fill in its level down here, so I'm going to just start typing straight into this document. We've got a level 5 monster, and let's consider some other demons. I've pulled up the demons here in the Shadowdark RPG core rules, and one thing we know about them is they're chaos incarnate, they're hard to predict, they enjoy destruction, And many are utterly unique in their powers and can take any form. That's one thing I really like about demons. We have these classic ones listed here, but demons of all creatures are truly chaotic, and they are embodying that in their form. And that's why this is really cool that we've rolled a boneless demon-like monster. I think we're going to be able to get really creative here. Okay, now we're going to try to contextualize this demon amongst its brethren a little bit. Remember when we talked about measuring stick monsters? We want to see where this demon fits into the continuity of other demons. So we might want to look at some of the lower powered ones here, like the Dretch. We've got a level 2 Dretch. We've got a level 8 Glabrezu. What else do we have? We have a Merilith, which is pretty powerful at level 9, and then we have the Vrock, which is level 5. Now, level 5, that's handy because that's what we're designing for, so we might want to look at the Vrock in particular and see, hey, what kind of stuff does this one have? So we're looking at its HP, Talon attacks. Its Talon attacks are actually not super high up on there to hit roll, which makes me think that I made a sort of tankier monster here. If we reference back to the combat rolls, it looks like it's got some +2s across the stat lines, and I think intelligence and charisma are not necessarily its strong suits, and that seems to be kind of consistent across the demons here. They're not really clocking in high on charisma, wisdom, intelligence. They're more of the bulky, physical type monsters, so we might want to stick with that here on this one as well. And I'm noticing that all demons are listed as chaotic. That really falls in line with how they work, so we're going to start there. And let's get moving on stuff like its strength. Now, we're talking about a soldier type monster. It's going to have pretty average stats across the board. So as far as a demon goes, I'm going to put that at +2 strength. I think this demon, being boneless and stealthy, might actually be more of a dexy demon, so I'm going to put a 3 in dex here. That's probably going to be its strongest stat. And constitution-wise, in context with the other demons, I think they tend to have at least some small bonus in constitution, so we're going to give it a +1 here. Now, intelligence. I'm not thinking this is going to be the smartest or the wisest monster, so especially due to the fact that its weakness is vanity, I'm going to give it some pretty not great stats across the line for its mental personality type stuff. And it'll be fun for the characters to learn if maybe they can exploit those particular weaknesses. Next, its movement. I think this monster, in my opinion, would move near. There's nothing special about how it would move, although we might give it some special talents or abilities down the road due to its bonelessness. Next, let's do its hit points. Now we know it's level 5, so it's going to have 4.5 hit points per level, so that puts it at 22.5. We'll round down, 22. And then with its constitution of +1, it's going to have 23 hit points. Okay, so now we're thinking armor class. Let's talk about that. Monsters start with 10 plus something, usually in their armor class. I'll often add their dexterity modifier if it seems like it applies, or if they're a humanoid type or something wearing armor, I'll keep their armor class consistent with whatever armor they have. This monster, being a demon, I don't think it necessarily needs to wear armor, especially since it's boneless, but I do think its dexterity bonus should impact its armor class as is typical, so I'm going to give it an armor class of 13. Alright, so it's time to start thinking about some attacks, and now we might come up with some ideas and then come back and change them up a little bit depending on what other special abilities we give to our monster. Being a soldier type monster, it has pretty average bonuses. Average in this case means either based on its stats or up to its level. So in this case, this monster has +3 dexterity. I think its attacks are definitely going to be based off its own dexterity bonus. And then we want to consider, do we need to bump that up a little bit to reach toward what its level is? I would almost never give a monster a much higher attack bonus than its actual level. In some cases with really low level monsters, it's unavoidable, but you generally want to keep it within a point or two of its level. So I think with this monster, sort of taking the average between its +3 dexterity modifier and its level 5 status right here, let's just give it a +4 on its attack. And let's decide what that attack is going to be. Now, I think being a boneless demon, it would be really cool if it could somehow whip its arms, you know, kind of like Mr. Fantastic, like it can stretch its arms out and lash people with its claws from a distance. So we're gonna say 1 claw attack, and I'm gonna give it a near range. So it can whip its arm, you know, up to 30 feet roughly. With that +4 bonus, we're talking a level 5 monster. Let's refer back to our rules on how powerful a monster should hit at this kind of level. Now I'm over here looking at page 193, which is in our monsters chapter about designing monsters, and there's a damage section here. Levels 4 to 6, we're assuming that a monster can hit with d6 or d8 damage on its attacks. It'll have good weapons like longswords and spears, or it'll have some natural weapons that allow it to hit this hard. So 2 or 3 attacks seems about right, and since it's a soldier, not anything super special as far as damage goes, I think we're going to put it at a d6 damage and 2 attacks. Okay, so I've added that long distance claw here, and I had another possible attack option in here, but I think rather than give it different other attacks, we might be able to give it a special ability along with this one that makes it kind of unique. Now, what would be something really interesting with a lashy armed monster? I wonder if maybe some kind of constrict ability, sort of like a constrictor snake has, would be kind of fun because it could wrap people up with its arms. Okay, so I'm over here looking at snakes, and the giant snake has a constrict ability. Contested strength to hold target immobile for 1 round. So it's something that the snake needs to re-up each time it uses its attack on its turn. And so why don't we use something like that? So I'm going to give this monster something called Bind. I like the idea of this actually being sort of a dexterity-based thing instead of strength, like the snake, because dexterity is this monster's, strongest stat. So instead of, just a crushing force holding the players in place, I almost feel like it's going to just tangle up characters so much that they get bound up. Okay, so we're looking good on attacks right now. We've got a cool attack with sort of a unique ability specific to this creature. Now we've got to talk about the other elements that we rolled up, like the fact that it's stealthy. I think it would be really cool if this monster could use its bonelessness to silently creep up on players and to move through spaces that a monster normally wouldn't be able to move through, which makes it harder to escape from or to notice. So I'm giving it an ability here called Boneless. I think first of all, being boneless and making really very little sound when it moves, it has advantage on dex checks to move stealthily. Ooh, actually, I'm over here looking at the thief, which I think has a really great way to phrase this. We should give this monster advantage on dex checks to sneak and hide. But what's more is it can also move through small spaces that only tiny creatures can fit through. Okay, I have this put in here as can move through small spaces like door cracks, just to give the game master sort of an idea of what kind of small spaces we're talking about. All right, so the last thing we really want to address for this monster is its vanity weakness. And I think having around 3 or so talents per monster, that's about the upper limit of what I'd normally do unless it's a super special monster. But we had so much fun generating this stuff, we got to incorporate it. So I think for the vanity thing, if the characters are trying to influence this creature in some way and they're playing to its vanity, I think they should get some kind of mechanical bonus. So what would that look like? Maybe something like vanity where creatures have advantage on con checks or reaction checks. Okay, so how about something like this? Vanity. Creatures have advantage on charisma checks or reaction checks when appealing to the demon's vanity. That's a really good way to actually avoid a combat with this thing. Okay, so we have some pretty good stuff put in here to make this a unique creature. And let's think of maybe then a description. I always put a few lines of description about special information about creatures relating to how they look or how they function in the game world. So here's kind of a rough description for now. A blood-red demon with oily skin the size of a human. Claw-tipped limbs whip and lash like coils of rope. And maybe we can just call this a lash demon for simplicity's sake. That explains what it does. It explains that it's a subtype of demon, which is helpful. And we can kind of get a feel for where it fits into the multiverse cosmology of monsters. All right, everyone, so that's it for now. That's our monster. We've got a cool lash demon, and I'm going to tinker with the wording on things a little bit, clean it up, add a bit more here, and maybe some fun roll tables and extra stuff to support this monster. And I'm going to release this for free as a PDF you can download below. And I actually do one of these every single month for people on my newsletter. I release a fully fleshed out monster with some cool art on the other side. So if you want to start stacking up some cool Shadowdark monsters, go ahead and jump on my newsletter. I'll put the link down below, and that'll give you access to all the prior ones I've done as well. So thanks very much for listening. I hope this video was informative, and I'll certainly be doing more monster stuff in the future. Thanks, you guys, and I'll catch you all later.